On Monday, November 12th, 2018, the Cameo King, comic book and pop culture legend Stan Lee passed away at age 95. He leaves behind a legacy of hundreds of characters that now transcend their comic book origins and exist on our televisions, on our movie screens, and in the minds of children and adults alike. Characters that got us to think about our struggles, our differences, and made us believe that anyone can be a hero are currently some of the most relevant properties in pop culture and will probably continue to be for a very, very long time. He also liked to do silly cameos from time to time. Just look at all these cameos! The guy loved doing them. 3 years ago I made a video fan theory about some of these, so I figured it would be a fun way to honour Stan Lee's memory by coming back to that video to give it a much needed update. In that video I suggested that all of Stan Lee's cameos in the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, were connected and not just throwaway jokes. Well, it turns out that was actually kind of the case. Marvel mastermind Kevin Feige revealed after the release of Guardians 2 that Stan Lee saying he was a FedEx agent in this scene,
"I was a Federal Express man,"
confirms he was the same fellow as this guy from Captain America Civil War. Now this kinda creates a problem for my theory. I suggested back in the original video that there could be two Stan Lees, one on Earth and his long lost father in space. This one cameo destroys that idea by crossing over those two locales, so I think it's time to retell the Stan Lee cameo story, but this time it's all about one single Stan the Man. Here is the timeline of every appearance Stan Lee makes in the MCU. He has appeared a total of 36 times in the past 11 years. 12 of these we'll put to the side. These are the Netflix shows and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Slingshot, where he shows up as a photograph, and Cloak and Dagger, where he is depicted in artwork. The timeline placement of these shows themselves doesn't matter so much, we're more concerned with when and why these pictures were taken and when the painting was made. Stan also appears as a limo driver in The Runaways. The timeline placement on this one is vague, but it will not be a problem. He does not appear in Inhumans, and that's probably for the best. Last time I started with Iron Man, but because this time there will just be one Stan Lee, we might as well start, well,
we should start our stories where they begin!
The first time we see Stan Lee chronologically, it's in the middle of World War II during Captain America the First Avenger. He is in the audience for a ceremony intended to award the captain for single-handedly rescuing hundreds of soldiers. He appears here as a well-decorated war veteran, presumably in his 80s, when he mistakes a man emerging from behind the curtain as Captain America.
I thought he'd be taller.
We next find Stan Lee a year later hanging out in New York City during Agent Carter. We see him taking some relaxation time getting his shoes polished whilst reading a newspaper. Unfortunately, the newspaper seems to be missing his favourite section, so he asks the gentleman next to him,
"Hey, could I borrow the sports section?" "Thank you."
The gentleman in question would appear to be a young Howard Stark, the future father of Iron Man. This would mark the very first of many encounters Stan would have with key MCU characters to come, and it's a remarkably tame start. The next appearance Stan Lee would make is going to be in Captain Marvel, taking place around 50 years after Agent Carter, in 1995. This would put Stan at around 130 years old, but it would seem he hasn't aged a day in all that time. Chalk it up to skincare products all you want, maybe good genes, or, and hear me out here, it was aliens. In Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, or as I call it, theory-ruining trash, we find out that Stan is actually a liaison for an alien race known as the Watchers. Stan Lee is credited as Watcher Informant and is shown to be talking to them wearing a full spacesuit when they are not, suggesting that he is not one of their species. For those who don't know, the Watchers are an advanced alien race in the Marvel Universe whose goal is to record the history of every alien species without interfering with them. Because Stan Lee is an informant, I guess he's allowed to interfere where they are not. So, back to the theory. At some point after the Agent Carter cameo, Stan was abducted by aliens and brought to the Watchers. They had recognised him as a valiant and honourable human because of his many service ribbons, so assumed he would be an ideal ally to witness Earth's history. They would later discover how wrong they were, but for now they optimistically equip him with alien upgrades that greatly lengthen his life and give him greater immunity to many hazards. The Watchers tell Stan that he'll be abducted every few years so that he can relay back to them what he's seen. They abduct him because he doesn't own a space vehicle.
"You were supposed to be my lift home."
Now back on Earth, Stan spends the next 60 years trying to be a witness to historical events and gain knowledge, meeting with the Watchers now and again. One of his earlier attempts at Watcher-ing occurred at some point after 1964, when he met with a man he thought was highly influential artist Andy Warhol, but was really just an impersonator. The impersonator immortalised Stan Lee in a recreation of Andy Warhol's The Shop Maryland, a painting Tandy Bowen would come across decades later during the events of Cloak and Dagger. Make love, not war. He would then appear in Captain Marvel in 1995, where we see him rehearsing for his role in the movie Mallrats. Except in this universe, he can't be famous for writing classic Marvel characters, so perhaps he's known for writing different comics with different heroes to the ones we eventually see pop up in this world.
Trust me, true believer.
Because Stan is sticking around in history for decades without aging, people would start to get suspicious. His simple yet poorly considered solution to this would be to just change his name. One of these pseudonyms would be that of Irving Forbush. Irving Forbush would be his identity while returning to live in his hometown of New York City in the early noughties. Now bored of his watcher duties, Stan would attempt to streamline his work by establishing a law firm called Forbush and Associates, hoping that any big stories worth telling the watchers about would come to him instead of him seeking them out. We see ads for this business in Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. Leaving that business running in the background, Stan then decides to become a police officer, hoping to have a bit of fun crime fighting. He got the job despite his age, passing all of the physical tests due to his alien upgrades, but the news of an elderly man becoming an NYPD officer made him a big hit on TV. Stan, or Irving Forbush, then became the poster boy for the NYPD. We can see images of his face plastered across New York in Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, The Defenders, and The Punisher. These posters encourage people to report crime and remind citizens that not all heroes wear capes. At long last, we arrive at Iron Man, the beginning of the MCU. Soaking in his newfound fame, Stan Lee is getting invited to random celebrity events and getting a lot of attention from women. He's invited to an event supposedly hosted by Tony Stark, who mistakenly greets him as Hugh Hefner.
Look great, Hef.
About 6 months later in Iron Man 2, Stan is another Stark event, the Stark Expo, where Tony mistakes him again, this time for Larry King.
Larry King. Larry!
Well, this time it was Happy Hogan's fault, but Stan doesn't know that. He is starting to get a little bit annoyed by it though. He decides to vent his annoyance by going for a long drive. He rents a truck and drives it west until he runs out of gas in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he rents a villa for a couple of days. This brings us to the Incredible Hulk. The villa's fridge is stocked with soda made by a Brazilian company Bruce Banner is working for. What Banner doesn't know is that some of his gamma-irradiated blood made it into one of the bottles. The bottle Stan Lee is about to drink from.
Wow.
Thankfully, Stan Lee isn't too badly affected by the radiation blood because he is also a... Not really. It's because of his enhanced alien immune system, because that makes much more sense. Perhaps while recovering, he also sets his law firm on the soda manufacturer to make a quick buck from selling contaminated products. After fully recovering in days, Stan, having enjoyed his drive from New York to Wisconsin, decides to go on a much longer drive across the USA, this time arriving in Puente Antiguo, New Mexico. During Thor, he joins a bunch of locals attempting to pull what they believe to be a hammer-shaped satellite out of a crater. He chains his rented truck up to the object and puts his foot on the pedal.
Did it work?
Nope, and he won't be getting that deposit back. Like a day later, the remainder of his truck would be destroyed because Thor has a
grudge match that leveled a small town.
A year later, Stan is back in New York City. He's taunted daily by Tony Stark's new building, dominating the skyline, never letting him forget the man who got his name wrong twice. Aliens invade New York during the events of the Avengers, and Stan presumably gets caught up in it. Due to his alien upgrades and police training, he probably saves some people and beats up some of the Chitauri, but in the end, the Avengers get all the credit. He's been mistaken twice by Iron Man, poisoned by the Hulk, and lost his deposit because of Thor. Now he's being told they're the superheroes of New York? No chance.
Superheroes in New York? Give me a break.
It's Christmas time in Iron Man 3. Stan Lee, still fairly famous, is invited to be a guest judge on the locally televised Miss Chattanooga Christmas pageant. Ever the ladies' man, Stan gives out the top score of 10 to all of the competitors.
One more time, Miss Selfridge, everybody! All right.
He would later find out that Tony Stark stole the broadcasting signal for himself, robbing Stan of a chance to maintain his celebrity status. This is starting to get a bit scary. It's almost as if these heroes are following him around. So, to escape, he goes on another vacation, this time across the pond to London, UK. Now very rich from his lawsuit against the Brazilian soda company, Stan Lee hits the London nightlife hard, buying everyone drinks and generally using his money to give everyone he meets a grand old time. That is, until he gets a bit too drunk and ends up in prison. Or a mental asylum, or old people's home, or whatever this place is. Here, during the events of Thor the Dark World, he is lectured on something called the Convergence by a nuts old man who soon steals his shoe.
Any questions?
Yeah. Can I have my shoe back?
In that same week, Thor shows up in the city and takes on even more alien invaders. These heroes are definitely following Stan around. Once he is let out of whatever this place is, he continues his money-spending tour across Europe, at one point meeting two women on a train travelling across Italy. During Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the three of them are moving through the train when they come across a father and daughter having a rather bizarre, heated argument.
Every other week, no!
I'm terribly sorry about your loss, dear. As for you, now is your chance to do better. Why don't you see that you take it?
Thank you, sir.
Let's go.
This guy seems vaguely familiar to Agent Phil Coulson as that old NYPD guy, so he begins looking into Irving Forbush to try and uncover who he really is. A photo used in this side investigation shows up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Slingshot, the mystery puzzling Coulson for years to come. Anyway, Stan's European spending spree comes to an eventual end once he runs out of lawsuit money. This forces him to return to the US with what he has left, using his police background to take up a job as a security guard in the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian is in Washington DC, hopefully far enough away from Tony Stark and the Avengers in New York. Unfortunately for Stan, Captain America the Winter Soldier happens, so a very important exhibit goes missing.
Oh, man. I am so fired.
And he was right. Lucky for Stan the Man though, only a few weeks later he was abducted to inform the Watchers of his new experiences. The Watchers probably have a lot of informants, so Stan is put on a waiting list and dropped off on the planet Xandar to chill as he waits. This is where, in Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket Raccoon spots him doing what he does best. A little bit of womanizing.
What a Class A prevert.
A couple of months later, Stan is finally summoned to the Watchers to tell them what he has seen. He tells them about his brief time as an NYPD officer, his celebrity status, and his spending spree across Europe, none of which seem to interest the Watchers. During Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, he goes to tell them more when suddenly a spaceship full of screaming passengers arrives.
Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted, at that time, I was a Federal Express man.
Now, this was clearly a reference to Captain America Civil War, a film that came out a year prior to Guardians 2, but actually takes place 2 years after it. I think it's safe to assume a Federal Express man is an identity he's used several times before. Back to the Watchers, they're more interested in hearing about an invasion of New York and a superhero team called the Avengers, something I'm sure the Watchers would at least be aware of. Stan dismisses these stories, telling them that he was the hero of New York and the Avengers are a bunch of punks. Bored with Stan's non-cooperation, the Watchers begin to leave.
Hey, fellas. Hey, wait, where are you going? Hey, you were supposed to be my lift home. How will I get out of here? Hey, gee, I've got so many more stories to tell. Guys. Oh, gee.
Seemingly stranded on an alien planet, Stan manages to steal a small alien ship that he uses to autopilot him back to Earth. He then hides the ship somewhere near his home in New York City. A few months later, Stan finds out about a party that's taking place in the newly renovated Stark Tower, now called Avengers Tower. Seeing the event, which takes place during Age of Ultron, as a chance to show the Avengers who's boss, Stan finds a way into the party by posing as a World War II veteran. At the event, he takes on what he considers to be a challenge by Thor to drink some incredibly potent alcohol.
Is not meant for mortal men.
Neither was Omaha Beach, Blondie. Stop trying to scare us. Come on.
All right.
Excelsior.
Yeah, you really showed him, Stan. It's a couple of months later and Stan has got back on the road, once again enjoying himself driving around the USA. Everywhere he goes he takes on temporary work to keep his car running. When we see him in Ant-Man, he's working as a bartender on the West Coast. Stan is serving a patron who is bragging about the attractiveness of the woman he's dating. Stan agrees with the man that she is indeed
crazy stupid fine.
Sometime after, Stanley is back in New York when he hears from his old Federal Express buddies that they've received a package in the mail addressed to Tony Stark. Because Stan got so drunk at the Avengers party, he missed his chance to speak his mind to Tony for getting his name wrong and stealing his limelight, so saw this delivery as an opportunity to finally get some sweet revenge! He gets into his old FedEx gear and heads off to the Avengers facility in upstate New York. Tony, tending to roadie after the events of Civil War, hears a knock at the window.
Are you Tony Stank?
Hooray! Get it! He got his name wrong! Good man. Anyway, I thought Black Panther comes next.
Terrorist attack at the United Nations a week ago.
But according to Marvel's new weird timeline, it's not. 2 months after Civil War, for the first time we actually get to see Stan's home. It appears to be somewhere in Queens, nearby to where Spider-Man is currently operating. In the appropriately named Homecoming, Spider-Man shows up outside of Stan's flat, attacks a guy, and sets off a car alarm. Stan, a man with intense animosity towards superheroes, goes to his window to give Spider-Man a good talking to.
Don't make me come down there, you punk.
Hey, Gary! How you doing?
Marjorie, how are you? How's your mother?
Looks like Stan uses the name Gary as another identity to hide his lengthy life. I'm going to plop Doctor Strange in here because the movie has a pretty vague timeline placement. It apparently takes place over a year, but Stan's cameo is just him commuting in New York, so this could happen at any time here, so it doesn't really matter too much. We should note that Stan is reading The Doors of Perception though. It's a book describing a guy's experience tripping balls on mescaline, which Stan finds pretty humorous.
That is hilarious.
Sometime later comes Black Panther. Still riding high on his success against Tony Stank, and now having successfully scolded another superhero, Stan has treated himself to a vacation in South Korea. Once again being overly generous with his money, Stan blows all of his cash on gambling. He manages to get some of it back, however, when the gentleman next to him scores big after leaving the table.
Hey, you won.
As the winning chips are unclaimed, Stan sees no problem with looking after them.
You know what? I think I'll just take these, bring them over here, and hold on for safekeeping.
Bored of travelling and gambling, Stan decides to go for a joyride in that spaceship he stole a couple of years back. Not really knowing what he's doing, he accidentally flies into the same wormhole spatial anomaly thing that Hulk ended up in, bringing Stan to the same place. Sakaar. He manages to avoid being eaten by scavengers when he finds some junk equipment that he uses to get a job as a barber. Aliens need their haircut too. Okay, maybe not you. Time is a bit screwy on Sakaar, so it's possible he lived there for a couple of years, though it's only a few months in real time. Now in Ragnarok, imagine Stan's excitement when after a few months of menial work, none other than rental car destroyer Thor Odinson himself shows up on his barber chair. It's time for revenge number 2! Stan equips his scariest hair-cutting equipment and eases Thor in.
Now don't you move. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be.
By Odin's beard, you shall not cut my hair, lest you feel the wrath of the mighty Thor. Please, kind sir, do not cut my hair. No! No!
Hooray! He did it again! Just listen to that laugh. It's possible Stan's gone a bit psycho. To be fair, he did give Thor a pretty sweet trim. Anyway, despite getting his revenge, Stan sees Thor as probably his best bet to get off of Sakaar, so waits around for whatever plan Thor may put into action. He eventually escapes during Korg's revolution, hitching a ride with the revolutionaries on the giant ship they steal, but salvages his smaller, faster ship to autopilot him back to Earth once they get away from Sakaar. Before Korg and Loki arrive on Asgard in the finale, Stan is already long gone. He crash lands back on Earth in San Francisco, while Ant-Man and the Wasp is going on. Just wanting to relax and get home, he rents a car to go on a long, pleasant drive back to New York, and since Thor's in space, there's no chance anyone can destroy his rental this time.
Well, the 60s were fun, but now I'm paying for it.
Stan has seen a lot of stuff, but shrinking cars seems to take the cake. His dialogue here suggests he was doing some pretty gnarly drugs in the 60s, which nicely relates back to earlier where we see him reading about other people's experiences with hallucinogens. Maybe he was high as a kite when getting this painting made too. Having once again lost his deposit, Stan takes the next flight to New York instead. Doing so wipes him out of any remaining cash, which brings us to our final 2 cameos. I've suggested throughout the video that the Stan of this universe has a love for driving and that he's constantly overspending and running out of money, so it would seem to make sense that he would take up a job as a driver. At some point earlier in the timeline, he does a few limo jobs. One of these involves driving the Runaways about.
We're here.
And having just got settled back home from San Francisco, takes on the gig of driving a school bus just as Infinity War begins. Overly familiar with aliens and spaceships, Stan remarks,
What's the matter with you kids? You never seen a spaceship before?
So, that was that. That was every appearance that Stan Lee makes in a Marvel Cinematic Universe film, explained in one cohesive story. You might think that some of those connections were a bit strange, but whatever, it's just for fun. That was all of Stan Lee's cameos. What the hell? What the hell? What the hell are you?
I am the embodiment of pop culture. I am the spirit born of all of those devoted to modern entertainment. I am the ghost of the fandom.
Ghost of the Phantom.
No! Did you not listen to anything I just said? I'm the ghost of the fandom. Fandom!
Oh. I thought you said Phantom, so it was like Ghost of the Phantom.
What? Why would I be the ghost of the Phantom? That's completely redundant.
Why are you here?
Oh yes. Sam of the Lamppost, I have come here to demand that you complete your task and explain all of the remaining Stan Lee cameos.
All of them? But they're all set in different universes. How am I supposed to do that?
That is not for me to decide.
I suppose I can figure something out.
You'll be needing this.
Here are all of the cameos Stan Lee makes in other Marvel movies. Let's blend all of these universes together to form the
ultimate Stan Lee cameo timeline.
ordering films with unspecified dates by the year and month they were released. Let's go. Stan Lee attends award ceremonies. A year on, he chills in New York and borrows a newspaper. He's later abducted by the Watchers, who ask him to keep track of important Earth events. They extend his life and give him a device to spectate multiple Earths as he pleases to learn the differences between them. In the 60s, he gets a painting made of himself by someone who isn't Andy Warhol. Make love, not war. He jumps across the multiverse at some point in the 80s. It's the X-Men universe. He had met the love of his life here. They watched as nukes fly into the sky. He checks out New York in another universe and almost gets run over. This universe sucks. He's never coming back here. A bit lost, he ends up in an alternate version of the X-Men universe where he lives in the same house. He's watering the grass when everything starts to float. In another universe, one of his established identities is summoned to jury duty. He witnesses his first superhero, but he kinda looks a bit painted. Anyway, he almost gets killed by him, so it's not a very good start for superheroes. By the way, the kid that saved him here is already an adult in this universe. In 1995, he's back in the original universe. We see him rehearsing for the movie Mallrats that will shoot later in the same year in another universe, our universe, where he's a famous comic book writer. In the year 2000, he returns to the X-Men world. He heads to the beach with his wife and helps at a food stand when they see a naked dude. He discovers a new universe where, while going to a parade in New York, he saves a kid from falling rubble. Feeling heroic, he goes to another universe where he trains and gets a job as a security guard. He likes his colleague, but something about him looks vaguely familiar. He goes back to the previous universe a year later and saves yet another person from falling debris. In another universe, he showed up for a bit, got bored, and then left. Everyone thinks he went missing. He took up a job as a mailman in a different universe where he's friendly with a Dr. Reed Richards.
Welcome back to the Baxter, Dr. Richards. I've got the usual for you. Good to have you back, sir.
Thanks, Willie.
He goes back to the falling debris universe for some reason and walks around Times Square. Stan is inspired by a news bulletin and gives this random guy next to him a short inspirational speech.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
He goes back to the Reed Richards universe to attend his buddy's wedding, but forgets his fake name is Willie in this universe.
Invitation, sir.
I should be on that list.
Name?
Stanley.
Yeah, nice try, buddy.
No, really, I'm Stanley.
Back in his primary universe, bored of watchering, he remembers his time as a jury member, inspiring him to set up a law firm to find interesting stories. Using his credentials from the universe where he was a security guard, he manages to join the police force afterwards, quickly making him famous for being the oldest new recruit in the NYPD. He starts getting invited to celebrity events where Tony Stark keeps getting his name wrong. In a fit of rage, he goes for a drive, settles for the night in a villa, and drinks some Hulk blood. This is the third universe Hulk has existed in, and the second, probably third time Hulk has given him trouble. After a quick recovery, he sues the drinks company and heads off on another drive, now enjoying the pastime. His rental is wrecked when he tries to pull Mjolnir out of the earth, and once he gets back home, New York gets wrecked too. Stan's heroism isn't recognised, but the Avengers is. Annoyed, Stan goes to another version of New York and chills out in a school library. Having called off, he goes home and guests as a judge in a beauty pageant, but his limelight is stolen away again by an Avenger. He uses his lawsuit money to fund a trip away from superheroes, but is affected by one again, this time in London. He gets on a train in Italy, but soon runs out of money and goes back to the USA. He works again as a security guard, but superheroes screw that up too, so he goes back to that library universe. As the librarian, he attends a graduation ceremony and, confusing universes, sees Spider-Man thinking he's that dude from that falling debris universe.
I think I know that guy.
He rendezvous with the Watchers and tells them about his wacky adventures, including the time he was a mailman in the Reed Richards universe.
I was a Federal Express man.
The Watchers find these stories dull, so they leave Stan. He finds his way back to Earth on a hijacked ship and briefly checks in on another universe he had visited years ago. He has a kid in this one, who he reminisces with.
Fred. Son. I wear 'em front. I wear 'em back. Dad! We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, like how he left him to go to other universes. Also, I guess he dabbles in superheroics in this universe. Could be tech from the ship he stole. Abandoning his son again, he goes back to the original universe to give the Avengers a piece of his mind. He fails and gets wasted. He later gets a job as a bartender where he is quizzed by a guy on the hotness of the woman he is with, which makes Stan think, I should become a DJ at a strip club. So he goes back to the X-Men universe and does exactly that.
Coming onto our stage right now. Give it up for Chastity.
Some of the patrons of the strip club love Stan so much that they create a giant mural dedicated to him on the side of a building. Having got his stripper fill, Stan goes home and gets revenge on Tony Stank, berates a newer version of Spider-Man, rides a bus, and does some limo driving work. Later in the X-Men universe, he comes across Deadpool and compliments him.
Wow, nice suit.
Zip it, Stanley!
Through the power of fourth wall breaks, Deadpool recognises Stan, but it's still another case of a superhero being a jerk. He heads to a cafe at some point here too. He goes to South Korea and gambles, gets bored and heads to space, accidentally ending up on Sakaar. He cuts some hair, escapes back to Earth, has another rental destroyed, flies to New York and drives a school bus. When Thanos succeeds at snapping away half the universe, Stan escapes through the multiverse where we see him walk a dog.
Don't give up on her.
either of you.
Then in another universe, work in a shop where he claims to have been Spider-Man's friend.
Can I return it if it doesn't fit?
It always fits. Eventually.
Oh, also, he works at a diner here.
Love seeing you two together again. You always were my favorites.
So that was that. All of Stan Lee's appearances in Marvel movies. You'll probably agree that there are a lot of logic leaps in this theory, but it was just for fun. Just a silly way to contextualise the real Stan Lee's favourite thing to do towards the end of his life. Cameos. He got a real kick out of those, more than anything else. Thank you, Stan Lee, and thank you for watching. Happy with that? Phantom Ghost? Ghost?